The following show is a Pod Avenue production. You are cordially invited to have dinner with the King. Pull up a chair and join WWE Hall of Famer Jerry the King Lawler and Glenn Moore. Enjoy.
Here we are at the King's Castle for episode number 76 of Dinner with the King. I'm Glenn Moore, and we have a studio filled with guests today. Not only do we have WWE Hall of Famer Jerry the King Lawler in studio, but like last week, like we pimped out during the whole episode, Kevin Lawler, first-time guest on the podcast, is here for I don't want to say it's debate, but it's going to be a conversation about why Memphis Wrestling is not what it used to be. But also...
Well, wait a minute. Before we get into this, how did my kitchen become a studio?
It's a studio.
No, it's not a studio.
Broadcasting in the Nook.
The Nook, okay. The little kitchen nook here of as you call the castle, that you will not leave. You love this place, don't you, Glenn?
I'm leaving Monday for sure. I'm out of here
unless you get snowed in.
I can make it through.
But let me introduce our other guest, other than my son Kevin. Which, like you said, this is going to be should be a fun podcast. But I have a very good friend who has. We just went and had dinner earlier, so this is our second dinner with the King of the day. Andy Fletcher is here with us. I've known Andy for a long time. You live not in Memphis, right? Right across down in Mississippi.
Yeah, I live in Olive Branch, Mississippi.
Yeah. Andy is a Major League Baseball umpire, and we've been friends for a long time. And when during the off season we get together once a week or so and have dinner with the King, and so we just had dinner. And I said, "Come on over and be on the podcast." But the only stipulation is we're not going to talk anything about baseball. As much as I'd like to, and as much as Andy would hate to, we're not going to. We're going to talk about, because Andy, you've been a long time Memphis Wrestling fan, right?
Long time, much longer than I've been an umpire, so it makes more sense.
All right. Now the idea of this show, Glenn, you gotta have to take credit for the idea of having the show. Like, well, yeah. What did you call it?
Well, what has happened to Memphis Wrestling, or why is Memphis Wrestling dead? Much to the dismay of people.
It's dead. Wait a minute, it's not. You think it's dead?
I don't think it's dead. I think it's.
You just said it was dead, didn't you, Andy?
Not as big
he
as
said
it
dead.
used to be.
I'd say it's probably on life support.
There you go, life support.
That's a good idea.
Well, I came to the idea, but after watching hours of Memphis Wrestling, the classic Memphis Wrestling that we do for the podcast, and what we talk about with our fans on social media, and people post clips, being here in Memphis for a while, it's like, okay, well, what's going on now? What's the big thing with Memphis Wrestling today? Where's the local stars? Where's the TV? Where's the weekly show or the monthly show? What's going on? And why? Why is that? We have Jerry Lawler here in Memphis. You see across the country, the indie scene is booming. There's new stars every week in Cleveland, LA, New York, Chicago, down south in Florida. There's highly promoted indie events with social media, YouTube. Shows are all posted all over. But in Memphis, there doesn't seem to be a regular wrestling show. So I just want to know, why is that? Is it because of someone? Is it because of just the way the times are today? Is another reason behind it? So Kevin has Wildfire Wrestling, which I've been to shows in Handy Park for that. It puts on shows with looking great presentation wise. But why isn't that a regular thing in Memphis? Why isn't there stars coming to Memphis to compete? Why aren't there local guys? Why isn't there a Memphis school? There's so much history here. Why isn't there any Memphis wrestling? So that's why I wanted to bring it up. And Kevin, you're perfect to have on because you have Wildfire Wrestling. Grizzlies have Grind City Wrestling, but I don't think that's more of a promotion. That's more of a kind of like what a.
It's not a wrestling promotional company, but it's a promotional event for the basketball team, the Memphis Grizzlies. Yeah.
But at least it's also just that alone kind of shows that there's still some life and some interest in Memphis wrestling. The fact that they're willing to do 6 wrestling nights this year shows that it's still kind of hanging on to some degree.
Yeah, and is the fans in Memphis that aren't maybe older fans that remember, Jerry and classic Memphis wrestling. The new generation of fans don't care about the history. They want to see WWE stars and not local indie people or even national indie people. Is it that? I mean,
well, one of the things you got to look at too is that what you just said. When WWE comes to town, which they're going to be here January the 15th, I think, they always do well. Raw or SmackDown, and I think that's one major part of it is the fans, the Memphis wrestling fans, the ones that are still alive. A lot of the ones that remember what wrestling used to be like here in Memphis are gone, and as are most of the wrestlers that were back in the Memphis heyday. And so, I don't know. My simple, when I look at it, my simple answer is what made Memphis wrestling so big back during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s was our Memphis television. And that's what people all around the country talk about. We had a every Saturday morning we had a live 90-minute, and I don't know if there's anywhere else in the country that had a 90-minute wrestling show back in those days. An hour was like the tops, but we had a live 90-minute wrestling show all of those years, hosted by Lance Russell and Dave Brown, which was two of the greatest commentators ever, and it was like. In Memphis, it was the thing. Memphis didn't have any other pro sports teams at the time other than, minor league baseball with Memphis Chicks or whatever. But that was before the Grizzlies came. And so wrestling was it in this town. And it was like everybody watched Saturday morning. And then we had the live event at the Mid-South Coliseum, which was at the time, during all those years, the Mid-South Coliseum was the preeminent venue. It was the big arena in Memphis. And so... wrestling was it was a big thing. It was a big time. And then, I think, it started in the mid-'80s when WWE and WCW got on cable TV. It started to wane a little bit there, but still all the way through the 80s, we kept the Tennessee and the Memphis territory going with live TV shows, where most of the other excuse me, most of the other promotions around the country had kind of dwindled up and died off because all their top stars left and went to either WCW or WWE because they wanted to be seen nationwide or worldwide. I was like the main star here, and I was part owner of the company, so I didn't leave. So we were able to. I think that was the main reason that we were able to hang on longer than most of the other promotions, and we lasted up till through the 90s. But then when we finally lost that weekly TV, then I think that is what signaled the end of wrestling as we all knew it for so many years in Memphis. And once you didn't have that TV, I mean, we did go along for a while. Like I said, in the 90s, we went from Channel 5, which is first started out on Channel 13, then to Channel 5 for 20 years, and then we went to Channel 30, Channel 24. But it was once it left Channel 5, it was never really the same. And to me, the wrestling show, the TV show, is what made the wrestlers appear to be stars. What made them into stars. And yeah, there's been wrestlers that are still here in Memphis, guys that want to call themselves wrestlers or whatever. But if you're not on TV, the people, the average public don't see you as a star, and they're not going to pay money to come to see you. Then the other big major thing that happened was, they shut the Coliseum down, and there was suddenly just no really good feasible venue to have wrestling in. You can't. The FedEx Forum was too big and too expensive to put in a local wrestling show. Kevin tried Minglewood Hall, and it was expensive, even though it drew well there. And he's had some other venues, but the Coliseum shutting down, and the TV show going away was what to me was the end of the wrestling era as we knew it for so many years.
And then also, I was going to add to that is that the fact that, especially when you talk about wrestling in Memphis from, say, the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, that was during a time, before and the early days of like cable television. Like, back then, people had maybe 4 or 5 channels to choose from, so it was so much easier to find or to watch the wrestling show. And then if you fast forward into now, there's so many other...
Yeah, thousands.
Yeah, I mean, there's just thousands of channels, but not only that, but just so many other things that's going to distract people and kind of get their interest, with cell phones and the internet and so much other stuff, to where, back then that's all it was, and even, as cable and stuff started creeping in and getting a little bit bigger, there for a while that actually kind of helped kind of create, a little bit of a boom there for a while, when you started seeing the WWF more on cable and WCW and things like that. But, one of the biggest things that I feel like there's just a lot more options and distractions, than it was back then. And then, like I said, with, the Coliseum closing and the TV show leaving, there for a while, remember we went to the big one, out there, and it's kind of like, how do you go from a venue like the Coliseum all of a sudden to like an old, Kmart or something like that.
Yeah, building that has a flea market in it. The rest
Right,
of the week.
that, for people to just, compare the two. The crazy thing about that was even during a time, but it wasn't the same and people didn't see it, but that was even during a time when like The Rock was here, when we was at the big one and, places like that. But, a lot of things like that has like played a big factor into it. But I really think, as far as right now, the biggest thing is just awareness, lack of awareness without a TV show and anything like that. It's just, and if you don't have, an adequate amount of money to spend on advertising, it's hard to just get the word out and let people know that there is actually an event going on. I mean, there's actually 11 different groups that run wrestling shows in Memphis right now, so there's shows that's being done. But the problem is, it's with you got 11 different groups, and they're all basically, for the most part, using a handful of the same guys at every show. So it's almost like all the guys are competing against themselves because they're on every show. There's nothing that really makes one show any different than the other if you can go see all the same guys. And then back in the day, not just from being on TV, the guys looked like stars, but they looked like grown men. Nowadays, like, majority of the guys look like they're 14 or 15-year-old kids. They don't even look like wrestlers. They don't look like grown men. They just look like little teenagers out there.
Well, let me ask you this, Andy Fletcher. Kevin just said there's like 11 different organizations, so-called organizations, that has or tries to run wrestling shows in Memphis. Have you ever heard of any of them?
No, he just said that, I had no idea.
Right.
And when I think what you guys just said, both of you are 110% right. I know that growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, the only way I knew about wrestling when I first started watching it was from the television show.
Right.
I mean, Lance Russell, Dave Brown, yourself, Jackie Fargo, Bill Dundee, those were the guys I watched every Saturday morning. My dad and I would sit in the living room floor and watch it, and by the end of the show, we were wrestling in the middle of the living room floor there. He was always a bad guy. I was always the good guy kind of thing. But there's no doubt about it. The only way I knew that there were other wrestlers besides you all was
magazines, I bet.
Magazines. Yeah. Baker's Big Star, they used to have the wrestling magazines. My mom would go grocery shopping, and she'd let me go read the magazines, and I'd go read the magazines, the wrestling magazines every time. I'd beg her to let me buy a magazine. That's the only way I even knew that there were other wrestlers around. But I knew you guys it felt like the back of my hand. I mean, because I watched you religiously every Saturday, and my dad would take me occasionally to the Coliseum.
Well, that's what Kevin mentioned before. When we were huge on Channel 13 here in Memphis, there were 3 stages, or 4, counting the PBS. But there was ABC, NBC, and CBS. This was even before UHF stations came about, and like you said, that was when you were on for an hour and a half on one of the only 3 stations that you could watch. Not only did everybody watch it, but everybody that was on there was a star. I mean, to kids like you and I growing up watching it then, those people were stars. I look back at somebody like Jackie Fargo now, And like you said, Kevin, they look like grown men and older guys, whereas opposed to the guys now that look younger. But when you look back at Jackie or Al Green or Don Green, these guys weren't big physical specimens like The Rock or Batista or any guys like that. They were just basically kind of ordinary looking guys. But the difference was they were professional wrestlers. And by that means wrestling was their job, their only job. They were professionals. Now, can you think of, Kevin, is there one professional wrestler that lives in Memphis or anywhere around here that really makes his entire living off of being a wrestler?
No, none of them. That's just it. They all have regular jobs and just do the wrestling.
It's almost like a hobby to them.
Yeah,
It's like something that they're a fan of. They could almost like go out and play at being a wrestler. It's almost, Andy, like you were talking about, you guys would do after watching the wrestling. A lot of these guys today that call themselves wrestlers are just that. They'll go and watch Monday Night Raw or they'll watch SmackDown, and then they'll say, let's, somebody, Joe Blow over here's got a ring. Let's go and do what we saw him do on Monday or Tuesday nights in this ring over here.
I can't tell you how many times that, try to run a show or something and you reach out to one of these guys to see if they can be available or even the day of the show, and they'll have to let you know if they can get off from their shoot job.
Right. Their real work.
Right.
How many of the 11 are legit? I mean,
none.
Yeah.
But they all think they are.
Out of the 11, there's only one group that actually runs consistent weekly shows and has been for a while now, and the rest of them, it's hit and miss. They might can run once a month or every couple of months or just once in a blue moon or something like that. But even still, even the ones that run on a consistent basis, they're lucky to get 50 people maybe in there. A lot of times it's less than that. Sometimes it's 10 or 20, and those guys are drawing like I said, less than 50 people, and they think that that's Memphis Wrestling, that's keeping Memphis Wrestling alive, and that's like the current, thing, and that's not Memphis Wrestling. That's just running shows,
Yeah.
That goes back to the using that Saturday morning show, because I vividly remember talking about part of that show was promoting the shows around the area too, because you guys were going to hit that circuit. You say we'll be in Jonesboro on Tuesday night or whatever nights it was. I don't remember the nights, but you had every Saturday you tell us where you're going to be, and those people in those towns knew this is where the wrestling show was going to be.
Yep, exactly. And it was the same for we did our primary show in Memphis every Saturday morning, 90 minutes, and then out of that 90 minutes they would take like 30 minutes of that was committed to basically just plugging nothing but the Memphis show. So we'd make a 60-minute show that would bicycle around the area in our other TV stations, our other TV markets like Louisville, Kentucky, Evansville, Indiana, Nashville, Tennessee, Tupelo, any other city in the area that had a TV station would show that same show. And then the guys would go and that was their weekly circuit. They'd go and they'd wrestle Monday night in Memphis, go and do the same match the following night in Louisville, Kentucky, then go to Evansville, Indiana, and then all of those stations, we would cut specific promos like you talked about here, plug in any of the small events that were going to be held around Evansville, small events that were held around Louisville, and that's just the way it worked. But all of those guys, wrestling was their living. They were professional wrestlers, and that is just something that's gone now. But what you were talking about, Glenn, and I don't know the answer to this. Indie wrestling, independent wrestling shows, which is that's the name that's out there now for anything that's not WWF or WWE. It used to be WWF. Now WWE. If it's not that, it's considered indie wrestling, or independent wrestling. But some of those shows are it's like they're on the upswing. I just did a show this past Friday night, Poughkeepsie, New York. I do a lot of shows for a guy named Michael Lombardi who promotes Northeast Wrestling. He has a lot of shows, And I've never been on a bad show for Michael Lombardi. This past week, they had 3,400 people. 3,400 people in Poughkeepsie, New York, in the same convention center or arena there that the WWE used to run in whenever they would run Poughkeepsie, New York. And he doesn't have TV. You know, he does it all through social media. And then literally, I mean, you know, some of the guys that wrestle for him, they go back and do some of the stuff old school. They'll actually go into the town, put out posters. They'll put flyers on cars, go door to door, and they make sure that everybody knows about it. And then he'll book, you know, like this past week, he brings in some names that are known from the WWE, guys that are, you know, like I was there, Mick Foley was there,
RVD,
Rob Van Dam. Jack Swagger was there. Scott Hall was there, and then he's got his own what you would call independent wrestlers, that guys that wrestle for him on a regular basis on just about all of his shows. And then he had David Arquette there. He had just any number of so-called stars there. But it drew. You know, I mean, he had a lot of people in the place, made money, obviously, and I think he would use those names. He has sponsorships. He goes out and sells sponsorships, and then that brings me back to another guy in our territory that grew up with me in the Memphis territory is Bert Prentice, who runs shows in Jackson and around the Jackson area, and Bert is able to survive simply because he gets sponsors to put in some money to help him get the shows done. But in Memphis, there's just, I don't know what it does. It doesn't happen. Oh, and the other thing on that independent show up in Poughkeepsie, there was like Kenny Omega.
Yeah.
And who was the other guy that Kenny Omega wrestled?
Phoenix?
Yeah. I mean, these are guys that are just known in independent circuits. You know, they haven't been on WWE TV at all. But they're considered big stars just from social media.
Right, and that's what I was going to bring up.
It doesn't seem that way here in Memphis.
Right, there's no getting a TV deal is the old school way, but now with YouTube and social media, and you can live stream the pay-per-view that you were on. There's a show of High Spots.
Yeah,
they broadcast it out for $10 for people to watch Kenny Omega if you come into the show. I mean, if you wanted to start a promotion, you have a promotion, and okay, you can't get a TV deal. You promote via social media, you post matches on YouTube, full shows on YouTube, or you be able to live stream it for, a few dollars. People can watch it from home. I mean, that could be something that you could at least build off of to build an audience.
Also, like with that being said, that kind of goes back to how I was saying that the Memphis wrestling nowadays is kind of on life support instead of just, totally dead, because there are some avenues out there that would help get the word out. Like, there's a guy in town named Kevin Cerrito that has a weekly wrestling radio show that's a way of kind of keeping people updated on stuff. Now the thing with the Grizzlies, they have a weekly wrestling podcast where they talk about things that's going on. And even to a degree, you talk about the TV, even to a degree.
I got an hour-long TV show that's on Saturday mornings showing classic Memphis wrestling.
Yeah, to where even
nobody talks about it.
But even that could be used, to mention anything current coming up. I mean, like when we just did those shows not too long ago down on Bill Street, there was nothing ever mentioned on that TV show about those. So a lot of times I think that it's just opportunities are being wasted. There's some memes out there, but no one's really taking advantage of it and using it to its fullest.
Yeah, and as a fan of wrestling and being in Cleveland, there's a promotion that runs a show every month, and what their formula is, they bring in like a Kenny Omega, guys, indie darlings, internet darlings that come in. They have a large following. Local people like them. They have their local people, that are Cleveland based with a wrestling school, and then they bring in a couple of the legends to sign autographs, not wrestle, but just sign autographs, make an appearance, and that brings in people like me who enjoy being the legends. They stick around for the show, and they might come back to a show because they enjoy what was taken on in the ring. That seems to be the formula wherever you go. You have a couple legends, local guys. They try to bring in some indie darlings from around the country to cater to that audience, and then you have a show.
But in order to do that, you have to have one of two things. Either the guy running the show has to, either have some money to begin with, to kind of start with, that he, can take a chance on risking that money, or have some sponsors to do that. But around here, like with me running my shows, I mean, I don't have, a bunch of money that I can just take a chance on losing, because that's what happened for a long time. I mean, I was doing the shows and they just, I do the shows on a different level than some of the other guys around here, to where my events, even without bringing in extra big name guys, just everything that goes into it is a more costly type show than the average show. And 9 times out of 10, the ticket sales that came in didn't cover the cost of the show, so you're coming out of your pocket, and you can only do that so many times before you just can't do any more. And so in order for somebody to really be able to kind of survive and do so, it almost have to be, there's got to be some money, to cover the costs of it, and more than anything, pay for some advertising. But it would have to be, if you don't have sponsors, it would have to be somebody who could safely say, hey, look, I know it's going to probably the first 3 to 6 months, until it really, the word gets out and it can sustain itself. You just have to have a mindset that you're going to lose some money, and you have to be in a position to be able to do that, where it's not going to just put you in the poorhouse if you lost a few $1,000s, for 3 or 6 months back to back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly why all of the territories fell by the wayside. Once they lost their main stars to WCW or WWE, it became simply not profitable to run wrestling shows. So they just stopped running wrestling shows, and that's what happened here to the local Memphis Wrestling, and like I said, around the country, all of the main promoters just basically went out of business, and then that left it to now guys that like the Michael Lombardi, who, and he was doing the same way, and just running, like you said, just trying to promote shows on his own, and then that became not really that profitable for Michael, and now he doesn't do anything except what we call soul shows. I mean, he'll go to, he'll find an organization who's trying to raise money, and he'll sell them a show, and then they in turn, they'll pay X amount of, if they paid $15,000 or $20,000 for one of his shows, then then the gambles and on them. They help promote the show. Michael promotes the show, and they keep everything over $20,000 that comes in. So then and now that's the only way that he's able to sustain his company now is doing soul shows. It's all about the money. It's all about selling tickets and letting people know. I used to tell people whenever we first started, not drawing very well here in Memphis, like maybe Buddy Wayne or somebody would run a show that nobody knew about, and I would just said, man, we could have The Rock against Stone Cold Steve Austin wrestling here tonight, but if we didn't tell anybody that they were wrestling here, there's not going to be anybody there. Yeah. And Jackie Fargo used to say, man, I was standing on the corner giving out $100 bills today. I said, what? I said, how many did you give out? He said, none, because I didn't tell anybody I was giving them out. So it's just that, it's all about, you gotta get the word out there. And in Memphis, I don't know if the social media is not as big a deal as it is in some place like Poughkeepsie, New York, where they had 3,400 people showed up just because it was advertised on social media. We did a show down at Handy Park that was free, and a very, very small crowd showed up because I don't know. I mean, and we put it out on my website and my Twitter account that has 1.4 million followers, everybody is local, websites and Twitter and everything, but still, the people didn't come.
Well, here's a question, just from an outsider looking in, maybe a touchy question. You have Kevin Lawler trying to do a promotion here in Memphis, trying to make it a regular thing to make money off it. You got Jerry the King Lawler living in Memphis, Memphis legend, and so why don't you guys work together on a regular basis?
Well, we do. I mean, almost every show that Kevin's done, I'm on.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just that is the thing that I don't know the reason.
And see, also like the Memphis area, it's kind of weird compared to like just some of these other towns that or cities that does wrestling. Like even like Jimmy Hart always describes Memphis as the like the city that time stood still, like nothing ever changes here as far as like the wrestling goes. All these other cities, I guess, just because that might have used to have territories and things like that may not have a handful of the same guys from back in the day kind of still living in that area or being in the area. They've had no choice but to kind of just evolve more into like an indie type thing, to where around here it's almost like the Memphis wrestling fan base for the past 40 years, all they've really just been given is the classic stuff, and it's almost like that's all they even really kind of want. You can try to bring some other big name people in, and it doesn't really do anything, opposed to wanting to see Lawler, Dundee, Valiant, Jimmy Hart, Lance and Dave, those kind of guys. And it just seems like that's just been the same thing consistently, like over and over and over. Like it was just talking about, I was talking to a guy last night, and he was saying, hey, I was thinking about doing like a big Memphis Wrestling Legends thing, it's never been done. And I told him, I said, it gets done like every 3 months, like this never stopped happening, and, but I think that's just one of the things is that even on the last few opportunities that there was a TV show, it wasn't really used to develop or create any new stars. It seemed like the last probably group of guys that really got any TV time or became stars, I would say would be like Brian and PG-13, and that was like like in the early 90s, and from that point on, it's kind of like no one else really just ever, came out of the TVs and became anybody that's still out there now.
Yeah. It's when you make up the Jimmy Hart, what he says about, this is kind of like Memphis is kind of stood still when it comes to wrestling. I wonder how many wrestling fans are, WB sells out when they come here, but how many wrestling fans would come out to see a Kenny Omega if he was in Memphis?
Andy, do you know who Kenny Omega is?
I don't.
Yeah.
But I'm also old. But I was just listening to Kevin talk, though. I really think there's got to be young wrestling fans in Memphis who know who Jerry Lawler is, obviously. But if you said Jackie Fargo and you said some other names like that, for sure, Al Green, things like that.
Have no clue who you're talking about.
None whatsoever.
Right.
But they go to the WWE shows. They do well here, do they not?
Oh, absolutely.
There's got to be a younger fan base here. I would think they would be starved for local entertainment. And how you get that to them, I don't know the answer to that, but I got to believe they're there.
Well, they're obviously there because, when NXT comes to town, they have good crowds. Every time WWE comes to town, I mean, they sell out, whatever that is, 10, 15, 20,000 people. So, I mean, it shows that there's wrestling fans in Memphis. I think it just goes back to what we were saying as far as just the awareness. People, there's, WWE has such a huge, social media, not to mention their TVs, that people can keep up with, and they know when they're coming to town. I mean, like on this next Monday Night Raw show, they'll advertise that night when they're coming back. The people will already know 6 months from now when's the next show,
right.
and they can start.
Yeah, they definitely spend money to make money, and we don't have anybody in Memphis that's willing to or wants to or has the money to spend to promote a show. And
Well,
once again,
actually, we do kind of. The guy who is puts up the money behind the barbecue place and the bar down at Bill Street. He wanted to get involved and actually run some shows and everything. And we did the one show, and you kind of put a stop to that and didn't want him getting involved and doing it anymore. And so that kind of shut that whole thing down. But there was somebody who actually had money that was willing to, because he even told me he didn't want to just do a one and done. He wanted to do some shows, and then it turned out to be a one and done type situation.
what show was that?
Gosh, I mean, that was like July of last year, maybe.
And where was the show?
It was at the Shrine Temple.
And what did it draw?
I don't remember what it actually drew, but it drew better than what we had normally been drawing, because I actually had some money to work with, and we ran commercials on Raw and SmackDown, so we were actually in a position to let wrestling fans know that there was a wrestling show coming on.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the Shrine Temple is it's crappy backstage area, worst, as bad as any place you're going to want to think of to dress for the wrestlers to be. But outside, you can put on a decent looking show there, and it'll hold a decent amount of people. But I don't know how. What's the most people you could put into that place?
I mean, you could easily fit 1,000 people in there if they showed up.
Okay.
And probably even more than that, because it has that divider wall that you could open up if it just, if it ever exceeded that, in the area where we do the meet and greet and things like that. So, it's accommodable for whatever.
If you got an investor to do like a month, what's your goal? A monthly show?
I would say a monthly show would probably be, a reasonable goal.
So you're in the position to where, okay, you get an investor and he knows, okay, he's not going to make money right away. Like, 1,000 people are going to come to the shows overnight. I mean, it's going to take you being on a set schedule every month. There's going to be a show at the Shrine Temple last Friday of the month. You're going to have a show there, no matter what. And you can promote 2-3 months in advance. You can promote at that Friday show. Come back next month. There's going to be a show. We're going to have blah 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 here. Is that what's going to take to be a regular show, to get people to come back, to get more than 50 people? Next time there's 100. Next time there's 125. To build up, because if
pretty much. That's pretty much a formula is to do consistent shows and let the people know when the next one is and things like that. That's pretty much what it's saying.
But looking at it from the investor standpoint or whatever, if you put, what do you charge for ticket prices there?
On an average, I'm usually doing like, $10 or $20.
Okay. So if you put 10,000 people, or if you put 1,000 people at $10 a head, you got $10,000. What investor is going to? How much of that is an investor going to get back out of a $10,000 show?
Well,
when we ran shows at the Mid-South Coliseum, if we drew $10,000, we were going to shoot ourselves. And that was back in the 80s and 90s.
That all goes back exactly. But that
$10,000.
all goes back to what we're saying is that, yeah, in the beginning you're not, but there's just in the process of that, while somebody is in a position to kind of fund the shows, keep them going, then also the goal would be to go and try to get some advertising and sponsorship. You have to have a product to be able to show to somebody to say, okay, hey, here's what we're doing, to try to get that to where that can eventually start to offset or even take over what the person who initially is going to just kind of be the backbone of the thing until the ticket sales or sponsorships come in, or even that person could be in a position to to do the merchandise, instead of having each individual guy trying to do his merchandise. You could have that one person just kind of doing all the merchandise and giving the guys a smaller cut and him taking a bigger cut. So that's also another avenue of some money that could come in. But it still just goes back to like you just have to be in a position to just know, hey, I'm gonna, lose some in the beginning, to see if this thing is gonna end up being able to sink or swim.
Yeah, and then that's like the one with me is seeing a product that's going to be there regular every month, and okay, behind the scenes, the investor, maybe 6 months down the road, if he's not making money, maybe revisit what they could do to, maybe giving you less money or whatnot. But giving one show and then drawing 200 people, I don't think is, the right thing to do if you're an investor. I think it needs to be a long-term deal.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you can't. I mean, that's what I had even told the guy before. I said, if you're only going to do one show, you might as well just not even do it, because it's not going to produce the first time. You would need a minimum of 3 to even see if it showed any growth. But if you're just going to do one show, then you might as well not even do one.
Yeah. And online sales. I mean, if you make a DVD of the show and you have for Kenny Omega, if he wrestles, there's fanboys all over the country. They're gonna buy the streaming of the show just to watch Kenny Omega wrestle, and that's what $10, $15 a pop for that. Having just certain wrestlers come in that they can't watch in Memphis, they're gonna buy the live stream or the DVD, or put a charge on YouTube. You can charge people to watch a program on YouTube. There's other avenues of money other than just ticket prices.
Right.
Well, I mean, and one of the other things that I hear from the different the guys that we talked about earlier, the independent wrestlers that live around Memphis or whatever, they say, well, they can't draw anything here because guys like Lawler or Dundee, they won't pass the torch to any younger guys. And Kevin's, you've said that to me. You may not pass the torch, but you say, people don't want to see the older stuff. They want to see new, different stuff. But
no, I mean, I think that at least what I've always tried to do is do a nice balance. I mean, you can't just all of a sudden just go to something completely new and ignore the past stuff. I mean, it's there's got to be a balance, but at the same time, you can't have a 75-year-old Bill Dundee out there on a regular basis, and people believe that, or even some of those other guys. When you start talking about like Coco and Dundee, some of those other guys, I mean, they're still out there, they're still active, but they're at a stage where they don't really want to do anything. They'll
no, and truly, you're right. Guys like that, people don't come to see them perform,
right?
Because they're not in their prime anymore, and that's why, without there being a TV show to perpetuate a storyline that guys are in, to where you get involved and you get invested as a fan watching this, what's going on week in and week out, and keep you invested in it. When you're just throwing one show out at a time, the only thing that the people are going to come to see is the legend guys, and they're only going to come to see them just to see what they look like now.
Right.
It's not that they're going to go. They're not. When I go out on shows, they're not coming to see me go out and put on a 5-star match. They're coming out to see the guy that was the voice of their childhood, or was the guy that was the Memphis Southern heavyweight champion for all these years. And they're just coming to basically see you and see what you look like now. But they're not going to come to see Action Jackson or name off the different guys. Name off the guys that you had on your last show.
We use guys like Action Jackson, Antonio Garza, just different guys like that. But at the same time, you're right.
What I was going to ask you was name off the 5 or 6 guys, and I want to ask Andy if he's ever heard of any of them.
Well, I'm sure he hasn't. If he's
then why? If Andy's a wrestling fan and you're trying to draw him to a show, what is going to draw? What would make you go to an indie show here in Memphis?
It would be tough to get me there, honestly. I mean, I would go see the old guys, but I do agree with Kevin that there is a young crowd out there.
All right, Andy, how old are you?
51.
So that's another thing. There's a certain demographic of people that almost no matter what you do, because of their age, that's just not really going to leave the house. They would want to watch it on TV. Well, I mean, I mean just on the radio, but I'm saying like to come to a wrestling show. To actually go through the whole process of getting in the car, driving another spin, doing all that kind of stuff. That's generally going to be like like a child up to like somebody like in their mid-20s or 30s. But once you start kind of getting in the 40s and 50s and so forth, it takes a little bit more for somebody to really want to go through the time and trouble to.
Well, that honestly is where you're wrong, because the biggest population alive on Earth today are the baby boomers still, and that's people my age. I'm 68.
Well, I know that, but you live a different life than the average 68-year-old person.
Well, not really. The average 68-year-old person don't think they're old. They don't want to think they're old. They'll still spend money, and they'll still go places to spend money.
Yeah, I know they'll do that, but I'm saying, it's specific stuff. I mean, I'm talking about to get them to come out to a wrestling show of just completely brand new guys that they've never seen or heard of before.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
They won't.
Have to.
You're right, and even the younger people won't either, because they don't view those people as being stars.
This is the thing that I didn't enjoy watching Memphis Wrestling necessarily for the wrestling. You said it a minute ago. Honestly, it was the storyline.
Sure.
Every week you turn in to see what was going to happen, and you knew that if you had somebody come in to wrestle for a heavyweight championship, Harley Race. If Harley Race came in 1 week, I knew that was going to be a 2 or 3 week storyline of what was going to happen there, and how you were going to win or you were going to lose, and if you won, if you were going to keep the belt, and that was a whole thing that went along with that. Or so many other wrestlers that you had.
Handsome Jimmy came in.
Any of those
knew
things.
For a few months, Handsome Jimmy's going to be featured, and whatever he was going to do was going to be interesting.
Correct.
Because you watched it every week on TV. And you
But I mean, you can't do that off just a random monthly show. But if you was in a position to have a TV show, you could do that. You could take no-name guys now and do storylines with them if you have a vehicle to tell stories. Which
Could
would
you
be
not do
TV.
that on YouTube or a social media platform like that?
You can, but you still, I feel like ultimately you need some type of a TV, because it's going to reach the majority of the people, and it's going to legitimize it. It's going to make it seem just more professional, more real than just a video that you saw on YouTube or on Facebook or something like that. It can be done. I mean, it shows with the fact that, just the fact that you've got that TV show now. I mean, that's the first time in years that any of the stations was even willing to put a wrestling show on.
Burt Prentice has got a TV show, and he got it on in Jackson, which is where his headquarters are, and now he's getting it on in the station in Jonesboro.
Yeah, but those smaller markets are different than Memphis. It might be easier to get them on, but for the longest, Memphis, it was impossible.
We talked about this before too. The thing that really killed wrestling for local TV shows in Memphis was the age of the infomercial. It became so much easier for a TV station to sit back and say, oh my gosh, we got to produce or help produce a wrestling show in our studio or whatever, when it's going to make us the same amount of money as a guy that's going to come in here and give me a DVD of Ginsu knives, and we can run that for an hour, and he's going to pay us the same amount to run that DVD that it's going to take us, to go out and produce an entire wrestling show with live wrestlers coming in, that sort of thing.
And I was going to say another thing, and I have people that send me messages all the time, say, oh man, why can't y'all, do the Saturday morning wrestling show again, or do the studio thing and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't realize that, since those days, Channel 5 has totally remodeled that whole studio and station over there. There's not even space available to do a show, even if they was willing to let you do it, number one. And then two, ever since 9/11, that also changed everything. Now there's a whole big, gate around the studio over there. They're there's no way in the world that they would just allow a crowd inside the building like they used to. It just
No, you'd have to do this. You'd have to do like Bert does. He produces a show in Oman Arena, and then he puts it on a DVD and takes it to the station. They run it, just the same as that's the way that the Saturday morning show is done on Channel 30. By the way, Saturday morning, 11 o'clock, classic Memphis Wrestling. But yeah, we go in the studio, we do the show, and even that became too time consuming for them because they weren't making enough off the show to continue doing that. So we've been in reruns for now. We have 13 episodes, and then it's they run 13, then they rerun them again. And I don't know if hopefully they'll at the beginning of the year they talked about wanting to start doing new shows again. Hopefully we'll do that, but who knows? But
that also shows just that the stuff with the Grizzlies that was getting big write-ups in the paper, a local podcast, a local, radio show that talks about wrestling. I mean, it shows that there's enough stuff there that if you was in a position to do something that you could go around and say, hey, we've got all these means of letting people know that there's something going on that, as far as like sponsors or something, you could go to them and say, hey, we're doing wrestling shows and we have all this other ways of being able to mention people's name and get the word out. And I think just the involvement and the interest with the Grizzlies alone would be enough to kind of, make people think, oh, hey, well, that obviously, there's some hope for some Memphis wrestling.
I think you brought up storylines, through the TV and people watching, intrigued with that way. I think it's almost shifted now in 2018. People care less about storylines and they care more about the match. They care about seeing a 5-star match, no matter who is wrestling, no matter if it's the face versus heel. They just want to see a 5-star match. And I think that's bookers now around the indie scene. They try to get these indie darlings and match them up to get a 5-star match because I think fans want to see that more than a month-long storyline.
Well, but that goes back to what the current fan base is. That's their mindset, their education, because it's been so far removed from territories and other TV shows than just say the WWE, to where the modern fan doesn't know what storylines are, because they're not watching them. Yeah. That's why. Have you ever heard Jim Cornette refer to stuff nowadays as being like video game wrestling?
Yeah.
Do you know what that means? What he means by that?
It's just you select a couple of guys and you wrestle. There's no...
Yeah, when you play a video game, there's no storyline, there's no psychology to the match. It's just you and the other guy trying to just do moves on each other. And that's right. What a lot of the matches look like now. It's just guys doing moves on each other. Just right. Spot. There's no... Very little psychology, very little storyline to the matches. It's just moves. And when there's no territories for guys to go and hone their craft every night, they're just independent guys that just go all over the country and wrestle somewhere different every night. It's just two guys and they're just wanting to get their stuff in. They're just having a match. They want to just do everything that they've seen on TV and they want to do. And so they're not, they're not as advanced as far as like being able to have the same caliber or level matches where the people are just really emotionally invested in it. It's just spots and moves.
Well, that's like the match, the show in Poughkeepsie the other night. As we were leaving, I was leaving the show, and there was a group of fans that were there, and we were the third match on the show, and a group of the fans said, "King, best match of the night." And when I look back on it, it was our match was me against this guy named Brian Anthony up there, and I've wrestled so much for Michael Lombardi as the King, and he took this other guy and he put a king gimmick on him. He's got the robe, the crown, and he's got a king's court and all of this kind of stuff. And so when they put the two of us together, it's like a little miniature storyline that was already there, as opposed to all of a sudden the next match was RVD versus Jack Swagger, which meant absolutely nothing, no issue at all. And then and consequently the match was just, it was just like you said, two guys out there trying to get their moves in on each other. So I still think there is a chance to do and have storylines. Even if you got to create them though, you got to have some kind of way to, create that little bit of interest in your match. And with this, they also had David Arquette was figured in there, where David Arquette was supposed to be going against this guy on one of the last shows, and then he was supposedly doing a movie and couldn't be there. Then at the last minute, David Arquette flew himself into Poughkeepsie, and he came out in the middle of our match. And then all of a sudden, when the rest of the King's Court showed up, then all of a sudden, Mankind, Mick Foley comes out, puts a mandible claw on somebody. I throw a big fireball on the guy, and it was a match that kind of all of a sudden meant something, rather than just like you said, two guys going out. And but even with the Kenny Omega match, that basically was two. Even though they had names on the independent circuit, it was just two guys doing all their moves.
Right.
And I don't know if there's a market for that in Memphis anymore.
Yeah. So
I think once again, I think when the people go to see I think when people go to see WWE, they go to see the stars.
Right.
So kind of wrap it up a little bit, 'cause we're at the hour mark. But what would it take? Would it take someone with money to put a regular show on to help out with that? Would it take getting the right stars in here or develop locals? What's it going to take to get Memphis Wrestling back on the map?
Let me start it before you get to Kevin. Andy, can you think of anything that would make you say, "Hey, I'm going to go see the wrestling show"?
I don't. At my age, probably not. But again, I keep saying this. I know I've said it 10 times already, but there's got to be a younger audience who would like to see more than just a WWE show, once every few months. Something that they could go see, whether it be once a month or once every 2 weeks or whatever. That there's got to be an audience for that.
All right, let me ask one more question, then you ask him this: What if at Minglewood Hall or at the Shriner, where Shriner Temple is,
Yeah.
right out there, right off the interstate, good location, and everything. What if you heard and you saw, hey, there's going to be a show, and you can go and see Jerry Lawler, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, Tommy Rich, Bill Dundee, Coco Beware, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, and all of those guys are going to be in the same building, and you can get to go and see them and shake hands with them, get your picture. Would you go to something like that?
That would interest me, yes. But that would interest me at my age group.
Right.
Yeah, but would you go see that same show every single month, though? That's the difference. Like, yeah, you can do that, and that's great, but that's like a one-time thing, or every once a year or whatever. But you can't do that every single month.
No, probably not. You probably couldn't, but you could divide it up. You wouldn't maybe have to have all those people there at one time. I know we talked about this, and you tried that too. I think you're right, though. I think there has to be some consistency to it. People know what to expect. If it's just hither, thither, and yon, then nobody can wrap their arms around that. But if it's consistency to it, I think that's a huge thing for
And then also, like you were saying, that there's got to be a younger audience. The whole reason that we're doing this podcast is it shows that there is an audience out there. It's everywhere except Memphis. Independent shows all over the country are doing sustainable business and doing good business. It's just a matter of making the younger audience in Memphis aware that there's stuff going on, and getting them to that level that's happening all over the country. It's not going to happen overnight, but
I don't know about. I was going to ask you this a while ago. I don't know if Memphis, because of the history of it, if the fans are different, and that will they support the younger stuff. I know they will go to see the WWE because they are stars that they see on television every week. Do you think Kenny Omega would draw in Memphis?
Not really. I think I don't know what
the Bullet Club, would they draw in Memphis? The Alpha Club?
I think you would draw a bigger crowd than what you guys get. I think.
Well, we're not getting anything right now.
Right.
Well, if you say you got a couple hundred people, I think it would bring in a couple hundred people just to bring them.
I would say probably, because I would imagine that this like when the NXT first came and did a show at Minglewood Hall, they had like 1,000 people in there, and I would be willing to bet that same group of people probably know who Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and all those kind of guys are. So probably so. I don't really know. What the level of the wrestling fan in Memphis is that keeps up with all that kind of stuff. But I would guess
I'm sure
there's some out there.
Yeah, I think you can also promote, come see the future WB stars. Guys are in indie scene that are on the cusp of NXT and WWE. You book a few of those. Okay, you get to see them before they make the jump to NXT or WWE. That could pique the interest of the WWE fans to come watch the future stars of WWE too.
I think it's a tough sell no matter what sport you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you look at the G League team, the Hustle. I mean, the games that I've been to haven't been particularly well attended.
Yeah.
All minor league teams fight for attendance and fight for dollars because, and we started this conversation an hour ago talking about there are so many things for people to do now. I have a 19-year-old son. He didn't know what a wrestling match is, I don't think. He's got so many different things that he's interested in. I mean, it's just a huge variety, and it all starts with his phone and his computer and video games, and you go from there. And talking about never having to leave the house, he would never have to leave the house to be entertained.
Right.
Exactly, and see, that's another thing is that, like the shows that was going on say Channel 30 that Corey was doing. Like, when did that stop? Say 2000. Like 9 or 10 or earlier than that, something like that. So realistically, there hasn't been a regular wrestling show in Memphis for
10 years. At least.
10 years. So, if you're a teenager or early 20s or something, and even before that, you probably just aren't really all that educated or aware of like what the regular Memphis wrestling show was like or is about, so there's this huge gap in there where that demographic doesn't even know anything about it, hasn't really seen it, and the only thing they might know is the WWE or something like that. And then you've got that other demographic that people of our age or so forth that did grow up with that kind of stuff, and they still want to see, some of that, to the best of your ability. I just think Memphis has always been a kind of a weird city. I mean, look how many things have come along, not even just wrestling, but how many things have come along that just never really survived because Memphis didn't really support it, like, say, the Showboats and the Pharaohs and the Mad Dogs and all that other kind of stuff. I think now we're finally at a level with, say, the Grizzlies and the Redbirds and other things where there's a new generation of Memphians that's all they really knew, and it's finally kind of starting to kind of grow and get support. But at the same time, that all starts with, even say with the Grizzlies or anything, where that's going to probably have its most strength is if you was a child now and went to Grizzlies games with your father or grandfather, somebody like that, well, then by the time you grow up, that's where all you're going to start really seeing that
my son is.
that generation and everything.
My son was a basketball fan, but certainly wasn't a Grizzly fan. We started going to the games, and now he's a Grizzly fan.
Yeah.
I mean, now he's got hats and sweatshirts and checks the box score every night to see what's going on.
And we have Lauren and I have 11-year-old, or he'll be 11 in a few days, a 10-year-old here in the house with us now. And, I can remember when he was 5 and 6, huge wrestling fan. When he first started being around me, got to go to the WWE shows and even loved going to the local shows that people would have around the area that I'd be wrestling on. And now today, Fortnite.
Right, and see, I think that's another thing too. I don't think, even with the WWE, I don't think that they are creating that 30 or 40 year long wrestling fan anymore. Like when I was younger and growing up, man, you got hooked on it, and then I mean, guys that are my friends, from like my age, and I mean, they still, because they got hooked on a certain kind, and they're still wrestling fans now, and then they don't like it as much. It's not the same, but I think like with people of Peyton's age, even like Brian Iyer's little brother, who's like 18 now. They just become like fans for like a short. For like a couple of years, like this, just
short
kind of
attention
like
span.
That, and then it's kind of like a fad. Like they were maybe into what was going on then, and then it didn't just hold their interest. Like from our generation, where like it just it was just a whole different quality, and a whole different level that it held your interest for.
Nothing holds your interest very long, though. Quite honestly.
Exactly.
And maybe I understand that. There's just so much out there. Heck, I don't blame them.
Yeah, as a 35-year-old who is a big wrestling fan. I've educated on who the indie stars are and who are going to be making their way to WWE. I mean, the pictures you showed me, Kevin, of at the Shrine, the presentation, the video boards, lighting, sound. I mean, that already piques my interest because I enjoy going to a show like that of what I see on TV WWE. I know it's a smaller scale, but then you bring in people that, like Jerry, legends that I'm going to go see no matter what, whoever else is on the card. I'm going to go be at the show because I want to see Jerry.
And see, I think that's another thing is that today's wrestling fans, when they watch the WWE, it's such a big production that and that's what they expect nowadays. And even some of the independent shows are it's a little bit more feasible to do some type of production that you couldn't do in the 80s and 90s and things like that. And that's always kind of been my thing. Like I have zero interest in just running wrestling shows. I want to do a certain kind of wrestling show, or I don't want to do any. I don't want to do the kind of shows where it's just a ring sitting there and there's basketball goals hanging around. I want to do the lights, the stuff, and all the bells and whistles. And then I was saying that, and then somebody made a comment about doing the wrestling night at the Grizzlies thing. They said, "Well, hey, you did or not that was even mine," but he said, "Well, they had a show somewhere where there was basketball goals hanging down." I said, "Yeah, but the difference is if the basketball goals are up higher than the ring, then it's a crappy show. But if the ring's up higher than the basketball goals, then it's a cool show." But I think that's the thing. I think you can't, if you're gonna do it, you need to try to do it to the best of your ability. You can't just have some cable access looking kind of TV and some rinky-dink wrestling thing. It's going to have to be, what people expect and to be any kind of a sponsor advertiser. You're going to want to see something that just looks as legitimate as possible.
All right, what have we accomplished here? Maybe we need somebody from a little bit. I mean, we got somebody on this, me in my 60s, Andy in his 50s, Kevin in his 40s, and Glenn in his 30s. Should we have had somebody even
younger? Should
we have Peyton in here?
Yes.
And Lauren in the 20s and 10s. I don't know. I almost feel like it's almost like a hopeless situation. I really honestly don't think Memphis Wrestling will ever be what it once was.
Oh, it'll never be that, but it can be better than it is now. I think it has the ability to be better than it is now. Just like I said, the fact that there's interest, that there's a radio show, there's a podcast, there's the Grizzlies doing stuff. I mean, it just shows that people still talk about it, think about it, and people are always asking me, and I'm sure they're asking all you guys. It's like, hey, why don't they bring Memphis Wrestling back? When's they going to have some wrestling? So there's obviously a market out there for people that want something.
Yeah, if we could go into Channel 5 and have the same freedom to produce a show, no matter what kind of, to produce a wrestling show for 90 minutes every Saturday, we could rebuild Memphis Wrestling and make stars out of, just create stars. Memphis Wrestling was going on long before I showed up. And, I was just a kid out of Treadwell High School that drew some pictures, and Lance Russell showed them on TV. And next thing you know, I met Jackie Fargo. He liked me. I started working for Jackie, doing a sign company, and begged him to let me wrestle once or twice. And boom, they just threw me in there first on Saturday mornings to get beat up by guys like Don and Al Green and the interns. And with a little bit of storylines and stuff, they created Jerry Jarrett, Nick Goulas created a star out of me. So it could be done again if we had that TV show, but we don't have that TV show.
Well, I mean, to wrap this baby up, I think Memphis deserves a respectable wrestling promotion that puts Memphis on the map when it comes to wrestling, where people want to come to Memphis to wrestle, and fans that want to go to, like, every month they know there's going to be a show. Presentation wise is going to be above average of what, just putting a ring up with some in the gym somewhere. That's going to be a great show to go to, and people are going to want to come to. They can see legends, stars of the future, and local guys, trying to make it. I think that's ultimately the goal, TV deal or not.
Hey, speaking of that, this would be a good opportunity to mention that this coming Saturday night, you're talking about Burke Prentice in Jackson, Tennessee, at the Ullman Arena. The Steve Kerr, Stan Lane, the Fabulous Ones are going to be back.
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
See there?
Reuniting.
And you live right here in Memphis, and supposedly it's been, promoted pretty heavy.
Well, I didn't see it.
Yeah. All right, guys. We need to let Andy get out of here. Andy Fletcher, Major League Baseball extraordinaire,
come back on.
umpire.
Awesome. Had a great time. Thanks for letting me sit in.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you did.
Long-time listener. He listens to almost every single podcast. So
I know.
It's great to finally meet him.
You can be the new commissioner of Memphis Wrestling down the road.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
Greetings, wrestling fans. This is Dave Dynasty, host of the Dave Dynasty Show, the podcast that every week brings you nearly 2 hours of pro wrestling goodness from the Midwest. We feature interviews with the legends of the past, stars of today, and the prospects of tomorrow. We have segments that feature classic wrestling audio, whole episodes devoted to the history of Midwest pro wrestling, and much, much more. Do not miss an episode of the Dave Dynasty Show. We are available on all podcast platforms, or you can access past episodes and all of our social media links by visiting davedynasty.com. Be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
All right, King. So, where are you going to be this weekend, buddy?
This weekend, well, let's see. Looking at my book, I'm only one place this weekend. L.A. Survivor Series, Staples Center, the 18th. November the 18th, the big Survivor Series. Man, watching Raw and SmackDown this week, a lot of interesting developments changed the whole complexion of what Survivor Series is going to be like. Injuries and different things. It's going to be and title changes and everything.
It's crazy episode. Nia Jax, Becky Lynch.
Yeah, got her nose broken and concussion. She's out.
And then, now you're going to have Charlotte Flair versus Rousey. And then you had Daniel Bryan beat AJ Styles for the WWE Championship in the main event.
Remember you and I talking right before the match took place? I said, well, AJ's going to win this and then face Brock Lesnar, and poor Daniel Bryan. It's almost is he getting punished for not going to Saudi Arabia? And then all of a sudden, that shows how much I know.
Well, him winning the title and facing Brock Lesnar could be a punishment. I mean,
yeah, you're right. Facing Brock Lesnar just about any time is a punishment.
Yeah. So the Survivor Series, with the title change, with Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar, we haven't seen that, ever. So that could be interesting enough to watch. But you'll be on the pre-show? I'll be on
do we call it the pre-show or the kickoff show?
Yeah, what's the difference?
Same thing.
Yeah.
But there's 2 hours of it. I'm going to be on the first hour. And so I'll see everybody watching Survivor Series this week. It's on the WWE Network,
Yeah. We're 999.
Yep.
I thought it was a great show to talk about Memphis wrestling. I'm sure a lot of people listening.
Nobody got mad
at each other, which is great. I was kind of worried about that. But I think people listening in Memphis, will maybe agree, disagree with some things. Let us know at Dinner with King on Twitter. Let us know what you think of the show. And if you're in the Memphis area and you want to see a Memphis promotion flourish with local stars, but also bringing in some of the national people, let us know on Twitter too if you're out there starving for a promotion.
And Kevin, if somebody was like a big donor or wants to be a sponsor, they can get in touch with you on that, right?
Exactly.
Or if somebody wants to sponsor the Classic Championship Wrestling, they can get in touch with you on Twitter or sponsor some wrestling shows here in Memphis, they could really get involved heavily with you, couldn't they?
They could.
Yeah. So hopefully this podcast hits off maybe some wheels in motion, maybe for the Grizzlies. You never know what could happen with that. So there are some avenues. It's just a matter of putting the time and work.
The Grizzlies definitely need to be advertising on my Saturday morning classic Memphis Wrestling show.
Yeah, definitely. All right, follow us on Twitter at Dinner with King. We're on Facebook. We're on all the podcast platforms. King will be on Survivor Series this weekend, so look on W Network for that. Kevin, what's going on? Any upcoming shows you got in the book, or anything you want to promote?
Nothing on the horizon right now, but you can always just check us out, Wildfire Wrestling on Facebook, or even just me on there, Kevin Lawler. For when and if something does come up, that's where we'll put it out.
All right. Like I said, follow us on social media. For next week's show, I think we're going to go back to our fan shows, where the fan gets to co-host the show here on Dinner with King. Make sure to check out Jerry Jarrett's podcast. Randy Hales is starting his podcast this week.
Awesome.
So Randy, check out Randy, Memphis Memories.
There may not be many Memphis wrestling shows, but there are a lot of Memphis wrestling podcasts, aren't there, Kevin?
I know, that's what I was telling somebody. That I said that the Memphis wrestling scene might be dead, but the Memphis wrestling podcast scene is definitely alive and well.
Alive and well. So you check those shows out.
And thank Andy Fletcher for being here today.
Yeah,
I forgot to ask him if he had any money to put behind a wrestling show.
Andy Fletcher?
Yeah.
Well, he's pretty well healed, I think. Major League Baseball umpire for many years.
Yeah, never know.
He umpired the Cleveland Indians and Houston Astros playoff series.
Well, I was going to be upset.
He did not help us at all, did he?
Help us at all, yeah.
That's what I told Andy. I said, you know what I hate about you umpires is you don't really care who wins. Yeah. And he said, yeah, you're right.
Hey, well, with him being a baseball umpire for all these years, he definitely would have the balls to get behind a wrestling show.
Oh! All right, we'll talk to everybody next week here on Dinner with the King.
The preceding show is a Pod Avenue production.